They are now doing one of the life scening in the past. The house was quiet with another time, which is exception behind their force back, which I been like yawn. Coaching mestered scening in the edX. We have to do sometimes a joined in trouble of yawn. We tier loves as a constitution specifically had in the capper testing. If you really mean, at the IDAX and New Year's, we truly sounded there against property distance, interacted. I want to start tour on for this abuni, but tour on that is an incredibly, successively described. And I was running out into her LinkedIn, search strong wine refine, and so strategy was a big in story room, and not side. Jake. The counter across from me, he looked more relaxed than usual, but his eyes were sharp, watching me in a way that made my heart beat a little faster. Jake was older than me by a few years, and he had always been more confident, more assertive. It wasn't just that he carried himself with an easy confidence, it was the way he always seemed to know what he wanted and how to get it. "I might have some," he said, his gaze flicking from the pot of boiling water back to me. "You've been quiet lately." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just shrugged, turning back to stir the pasta. "Yeah, I guess." Jake moved again, stepping closer, and I could feel the heat of his body behind me. Even though we weren't touching, he had a way of closing the distance without me realizing it until he was right there, so close that I could practically feel his breath on the back of my neck. It made my skin tingle, and I hated that it did. "You okay?" he asked, his voice lower now, more serious. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I tried to ignore it. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Why wouldn't I be? Jake didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned over my shoulder, glancing down at the pot of pasta, his arm brushing against mine. The contact was brief, but it was enough to send my heart racing. There was something about the way he moved, the way he was so comfortable in my space, that made it hard to breathe. "You've just seemed off lately," Jake continued, his voice close to my ear now. "Like something's been bothering you." I swallowed hard, trying to focus on the task at hand, but it was impossible to ignore the way his presence was overwhelming every one of my senses. I could feel the heat of him behind me, the weight of his gaze on the side of my face, and it was all I could do not to turn around and face him. "I'm fine," I said again. The voice didn't sound as convincing as I'd hoped, and that is where it all started. Jake didn't move away. Instead, he stepped even closer, his chest now brushing against my back as he reached around me to turn off the stove. The sudden closeness made my breath hitch, and I felt a wave of heat rush through me that had nothing to do with the stove. "You don't seem fine," he murmured, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You seem like you've been avoiding me." I didn't know what to say to that, because in a way he was right. I had been avoiding him, though I hadn't admitted it to myself until now. There was something about the way things had changed between us, something unspoken but impossible to ignore. It was like the tension had been building for months, and now it was coming to a head. "I'm not avoiding you," I managed to say. Though my voice was shaky, I could feel the warmth of his breath against the side of my neck, and it was driving me crazy. Jake's hand moved, then his fingers brushing lightly against my arm, and the simple touch sent a jolt of electricity through me. I stiffened, not sure what to do, not sure how to respond. My mind was racing, my body betraying me in ways I wasn't prepared for. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice soft, but laced with something I couldn't quite place. "Because it feels like you've been keeping your distance." I turned slightly, just enough to glance over my shoulder at him, and the look in his eyes stopped me cold. There was something intense there, something I hadn't seen before. It wasn't just curiosity or concern, it was desire, raw and unfiltered. It took my breath away. Jake didn't back off. Instead, he leaned in closer, his lips just inches from my ear. "Now you don't have to avoid me," he whispered, his voice sending shivers down my spine. "You don't have to pretend." My heart was pounding in my chest, my thoughts spinning out of cars I'd lived with for the past 2 years. And yet, in that moment, he didn't feel like a brother. He felt like something else entirely. Something that scared me and excited me all at once. "I'm not pretending," I said quietly, though. The words felt hollow, like I was trying to convince myself more than him. Michael smiled, then a slow, knowing smile that made my stomach flip. His hand moved again, this time resting lightly on my hip, and I felt my breath hitch in my throat. My body was reacting to him in ways I hadn't anticipated, and I didn't know how to handle it. "I think you are," he murmured, his voice low and smooth. "But it's okay. You don't have to pretend anymore." The kitchen felt smaller now, like the walls were closing in, trapping me in the moment. Michael's hand rested lightly on my hip, and I could feel the weight of it, the heat of his touch spreading through me like wildfire. My mind was racing, a jumbled mess of thoughts I couldn't quite untangle. How had we gotten here? How had something so casual turned into this? Into something charged, something I couldn't quite explain. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my chest as Michael's fingers flexed slightly against my hip. His body was close, too close, his breath warm against the side of my neck. He wasn't touching me in a way that was obvious, but it was enough to set every nerve on fire. I couldn't move, couldn't think, and all I could do was stand there, frozen in place, as he leaned in even closer. "I've noticed the way you look at me," Michael whispered, his voice sending shivers down my spine. "I've been watching you too." My heart skipped a beat at his words, and I felt a rush of something, panic, desire, confusion, pulse through me. This was my stepbrother, and yet the way he was touching me, the way he was looking at me, made it impossible to ignore the tension that had been building between us months. I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady, but it came out shaky, weak. Michael Law's hand tightened slightly on my hip, pulling me just a little closer to him. I could feel the heat of his body, now pressed lightly against mine, and it was overwhelming. "You don't have to lie," he murmured, his lips brushing against my ear and in a way that made my breath hitch. "I know you've been feeling it too." I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of everything happening around me, but it was impossible. My body was betraying me, reacting to him in ways I couldn't control. I should have pulled away, should have stopped this before it went any further, but I didn't. I couldn't. Something about the way he was touching me, the way he was looking at me, made it impossible to think straight. I started to say, but my voice trailed off as Michael Law's hand moved from my hip to my lower back, pulling me even closer to him. I could feel the tension between us, the unspoken desire that had been simmering for so long, finally rising to the surface. "Don't have to say anything," Michael whispered, his voice soft but insistent. "You just have to stop pretending," and then hand moved slowly up my back, his fingers tracing the curve of my spine, and I felt a shiver run through me at the simple touch. My breath quickened, my heart pounding in my chest, as the reality of what was happening finally started to sink in. This was real. This was happening, and there was no going back. I turned slightly, just enough to meet his gaze, and the intensity in his eyes took my breath away. It wasn't just lust or desire, something deep there, something I couldn't quite name that made my pulse race even faster. "You've been avoiding me," Michael Roz said quietly, his eyes searching mine for any sign of resistance, but there was none. Why, I didn't know how to answer that. Maybe I had been avoiding him because I knew this moment was coming. Maybe I had been trying to ignore the way my body reacted to him, the way I felt whenever he was close. But now standing here with him, with his hand on my back, and his breath warm against my skin, it felt like there was no point in denying it any longer. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Michael's lips curved into a small smile, the kind that sent a jolt of electricity through me. "I think you do." He leaned in closer, his lips brushing against my neck, now soft and teasing, and I felt my body tremble in response. The kitchen seemed to fade away, the world narrowing down to just the two of us. The heat of his body pressed against mine, the sensation of his lips on my skin. "Michael," I breathed, unsure of what I was going to say, unsure of what I even wanted to say. He pulled back slightly, just enough to look into my eyes again, and the intensity there was enough to make my heart race all over again. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. "Just let it happen." Before I could respond, Michael closed the distance between us, his lips brushing against mine in a kiss that was soft, at first tentative, as if he was waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. I kissed him back, my body responding before my mind had a chance to catch up, and the tension between us finally snapped. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate, and I felt Michael's hands slide up to the back of my neck, pulling me even closer to him. The heat between us was overwhelming, all-consuming, and I found myself leaning into him, craving the contact, the intensity of the moment. My mind was spinning, my thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and desire, but none of it mattered anymore. All I could focus on was the way Michael was kissing me, the way his hands felt on my skin, the way my body was reacting to him. In ways I hadn't expected, we broke apart, both of us breathless, our foreheads resting against each other as we tried to catch our breath. My heart was still pounding in my chest, my mind still reeling from everything that had just happened, and I could see the same mix of emotions in Michael's eyes: desire, confusion, and something deeper, something unspoken, but undeniable. "This changes things." "Things," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own heartbeat. Michael nodded, his hand still resting on the back of my neck, his thumb brushing lightly against my skin. "Yeah," he said softly, "but maybe that's okay." I pulled back slightly, just enough to look at him fully, my heart racing as I tried to process everything. There was no denying what had just happened between us, and there was no going back. Now we had crossed a line, and it had changed everything. But it didn't end there. "We need to be careful," I said quietly, my voice shaky but honest. We can't let this get out of hand." Michael smiled, his hand moving back down to rest lightly on my hip. "Again, we'll take it slow," he promised. "We don't have to rush anything." The weight of his words settled over me, and for the first time since this had all started, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. We didn't have to figure everything out right now. We didn't have to know what this meant or where it was going. We just had to be here together and take it one step at a time. I nodded slowly, still trying to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Michael leaned in again, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead, and the gesture was so simple, so gentle, that it made my chest tighten with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the room shifted, becoming something softer, something more comfortable. The urgency we're going back of the moment had passed, but the connection between us was still there, still simmering, just beneath the surface. "We'll figure it out," Michael said softly, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't scared. I didn't know what came next, but I knew we'd figure it out. Together. And then there was a shift. The weight of what had just happened between us hung in the air, making every breath feel heavier. My mind was still reeling from the kiss, from the way Michael's hands had felt on me, from the way I hadn't pulled away. It wasn't just the kiss itself that had changed things. It was the realization that I had wanted it, that part of me had been waiting for this moment without even realizing it. Michael stepped back slightly, giving me space, but his eyes never left mine. There was something in his gaze that made my heart race all over again, something that told me this wasn't just a fleeting moment for him either. "You okay, Michael?" asked softly, his voice gentle, but filled with the same intensity that had been building between us for months. I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was feeling. The kiss had stirred up so many emotions, so many questions, and I wasn't sure I had the answers to any of them. But one thing was clear: whatever this was between us, it wasn't going away. "I'm okay," I replied, my voice a little shaky, but honest. I wasn't expecting that." Michael smiled, a small, almost relieved smile. "Neither was I," he admitted, his hand still resting lightly on my hip. "But now that it's happened," he trailed off, his eyes searching mine as if he was trying to find the right words to explain what he was feeling. But there were no easy explanations for what had just happened between us. This was uncharted territory, and we were both trying to figure out what it meant. Michael stepped closer again, his hand moving up to gently cut my face, his thumb brushing lightly against my cheek. The touch was soft, almost tender, and it made my heart flutter in a way that was both exciting and terrifying. I had never seen this side of him before, this vulnerability, this openness, and it made everything feel more real. "I don't want to mess this up," Michael said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. "I don't want to rush into anything, but I also don't want to ignore what's happening between us." His words hit me hard, and I felt a surge of emotions rise up inside me. This wasn't just some casual moment between us. This was real, and it had the potential to change everything. The thought of that scared me, but it also made me feel something else, something I hadn't let myself feel before. "I don't want to mess it up either," I admitted, my voice soft. "But we have to be careful. This is complicated." Michael nodded, his thumb still brushing lightly against my cheek. "I know, but we don't have to have all the answers right now. We can take it one step at a time." The words were simple, but they brought a sense of calm that I hadn't expected. Maybe we didn't need to figure everything out right away. Maybe it was okay to just let things happen, to see where this went without putting too much pressure on it. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my chest start to ease. "One step at a time," I echoed my voice. "Steady now." Michael smiled, his hand dropping from my face to rest lightly on my shoulder. "We'll figure it out," he said softly, "together." The weight of his words settled over me, and for the first time since all of this had started, I felt a sense of clarity. We didn't have to rush into anything. We didn't have to define what this was right away. We just had to be here, in the moment, and take it one at a time. Michael's hand slid down to my arm, his touch sending a familiar jolt of electricity through me, and I couldn't help but lean into him slightly. The tension between us was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, but it wasn't as overwhelming as it had been before. It was softer now, more manageable, and I found myself feeling more comfortable with the idea of letting things unfold naturally. "We should probably get back to cooking," I said, glancing at the stove where the pot of pasta had long since finished boiling. Michael laughed softly, his hands squeezing my arm gently. "Yeah, we probably should." We both stepped back, the tension in the room easing slightly as we returned to the task at hand. But the energy between us was different now. There was no more pretending, no more ignoring the connection that had been building for so long. It was out in the open, and even though it felt like everything had changed, there was a sense of relief in that. As I stirred the pasta and Michael grabbed plates from the cabinet, I couldn't help but glance at him from the corner of my eye. There was something about the way he moved, the way he carried himself that made my heart race all over again. It was like seeing him in a completely new light, and I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. But the story didn't end here. As we sat down at the kitchen table, the air between us still felt charged, but it was more comfortable now. We didn't need to talk about what had happened right away. We didn't need to rush into anything. We had time, and that was enough for now. So Michael said, after a few minutes of silence, his eyes flicking up to meet mine, "What do we do now?" The question hung in the air between us, and I could feel the weight of it settling over me. There was no easy answer to that. What did we do? Now we had crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed, but that didn't mean we had to figure everything out right away. "We keep going," I replied, my voice quiet but sure. "We take it one day at a time." Michael smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made my heart flutter. "I like that," he said, his voice just as quiet, "one day at a time." The tension between us had shifted, becoming something more manageable, something that felt less overwhelming. Now that we had acknowledged it, there were still so many questions, so many things we hadn't even begun to figure out. But for the first time, it didn't feel impossible. We had crossed a line, yes, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe it was the beginning of something new, something we both had been waiting for without even realizing it. As the night went on, the conversation between us flowed easily, like it always had. But there was something different now, an unspoken understanding between us, a connection that felt stronger than it ever had before. It was comforting in a way, knowing that we didn't have to hide anymore, that we didn't have to pretend. And as we sat there, laughing and talking like nothing had changed, I realized that maybe everything was going to be okay. We would figure it out together. The weight of the evening settled over us, soft and comfortable. As the minutes turned into hours, the tension that had once been thick and unspoken between us had now eased into something more familiar, something less intense, but no less meaningful. Michael and I were sitting at the kitchen table, talking about nothing in particular, but it felt different. Everything felt different. Now, we'd crossed a line. But instead of feeling anxious or confused, there was a sense of calm that came with it. The connection between us was undeniable, and we both knew it. There was no point in pretending anymore. As the conversation slowed, the night crept further in. Michael leaned back in his chair, his eyes on me, in that way that sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just the physical attraction, though. That was certainly there. It was something deeper, something that had always been simmering between us. But now it was out in the open, and it was impossible to ignore. "I never thought we'd end up here," Michael said quietly, his voice low but full of sincerity. "But I'm glad we did." I looked at him, my heart fluttering at the softness in his gaze. This was the side of him I hadn't seen before, the side that wasn't all confidence and swagger, but vulnerability. It made everything feel more real, more grounded. "Me too," I admitted, my voice just as soft. "I don't know how we got here, but I'm not sorry about it." Michael's lips curved into a small smile, the kind that made my chest tighten in ways I hadn't expected. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing lightly against mine, and the simple touch sent a wave of warmth through me. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't rushed. It was just real. "I'm not sorry either," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I know it's complicated, but I think we can figure it out." His words were a promise, one that filled me with a strange mix of hope and certainty. We didn't have all the answers, and we didn't need to. What mattered was that we were in this together, and that was enough for now. Michael stood up, moving around the table to stand beside me. His hand rested on my shoulder, his touch light but steady, and I felt the familiar pull of his presence wash over me. It was intoxicating, the way he could make me feel so grounded and yet so unsteady at the same time. "We should probably get some sleep," he said, though there was a flicker of something deeper in his voice. I nodded. Though I wasn't entirely sure I wanted the night to end, there was something about the quiet intimacy between us that made me want to stay in this moment a little longer. But I knew he was right. It was late, and we needed time to process everything that had happened. Michael's hand slid down to my arm, pulling gently to my feet. For a moment, we just stood there, close enough to feel the heat of each other's bodies, but not quite touching. The tension between us hadn't disappeared. It had just changed, become something more familiar, something we both understood now. "Are you sure about this?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael nodded, his hand moving up to cut my face, his thumb brushing lightly against my cheek. "I've never been more sure about anything," he said softly. "We'll take it slow, one day at a time." His words were exactly what I needed to hear. The reassurance, the promise of taking things one step at a time. It made everything feel less overwhelming, less daunting. We didn't have to figure everything out right now. We just had to be here together and let things unfold naturally. But the story doesn't end here. Michael leaned in, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to my forehead, and the gesture made my chest tighten with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just desire, it was something deeper, something that felt like it had always been there between us, waiting for the right moment to surface. "I'll see you in the morning," Michael whispered against my skin, his voice full of warmth. I nodded, unable to speak as he stepped back, giving me one last look before heading down the hallway toward his room. The air felt heavier without him there, and I stood in the kitchen for a few moments, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. We had crossed a line tonight, but it hadn't felt wrong. It had felt inevitable. We had been moving toward this moment for a long time, and now that it had happened, I couldn't imagine going back to the way things had been before. But the story doesn't end here. As I made my way to my room, my mind was still spinning with the events of the night, but there was a strange sense of peace that came with it. Michael and I had taken the first step towards something new, something that had the potential to change everything. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of that change. I welcomed it. I lay down in bed, my thoughts still swirling. But it wasn't long before sleep overtook me. The next morning, I woke up to the soft sound of footsteps outside my room. For a moment, I panicked, wondering if the events of the previous night had been a dream. But then Michael Less's face appeared in the doorway, and I knew it had been real. "Morning," he said, his voice casual, but his eyes full of the same intensity from the night before. "Morning," I replied, sitting up in bed. "Sleep well," Michael smiled, a knowing smile that sent a familiar warmth through me. Better than I expected. There was an unspoken understanding between us now, one that didn't need to be acknowledged out loud. We were in this together, and whatever came next, we would face it side by side. Michael Less leaned against the doorframe, his eyes locking onto mine. "You ready for whatever happens next?" I smiled, my heart fluttering at the weight of his words. "Yeah," I said softly. "One day at a time." Michael Less nodded, his eyes softening as he looked at me. One day at a time. And with that, everything felt right. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was real. And for now, that was a long term.